I have, in the past, mocked European video games of the 1980s. Not for how they looked and sounded. I'm never fond of that kind of criticism, especially when the developers were working with their system limitations. No, I make fun of these games for how they play. And it doesn't hurt that the people who grew up with these games tend to get very offended when you point out their obvious flaws. I'm not going to delve into the history of game development in Europe and the players who responded to it. The hows and whys of the microcomputer boom of the early 80s and the resulting direction that they pushed game development into is a topic for somebody who's more heavily embedded with it. The important thing is that Europe, and the UK in particular, became a Galapagos of game development. A place where evolution followed its own path. And sometimes I wonder, am I being unfair to an entire era of game development? Games that had huge fan bases, games that had considerable influence. And I thought, why don't I take a serious look at one of the most popular games on one of the most popular platforms out there. This is Treasure Island Dizzy, aka Dizzy 2. And of course I'm playing it on the ZX Spectrum. Or at least an emulator so I don't have to deal with 50 Hz output. The Dizzy games were among the biggest releases for the ZX Spectrum. So popular and so significant that I think it's reasonable to call Dizzy the unofficial mascot of the system. If you go looking for people calling out the greatest 8-bit microcomputer games, odds are you're going to find at least one Dizzy game, possibly more than one. Why start with Dizzy 2 instead of the first? Well, mainly because I've seen people recommend Treasure Island Dizzy as the peak of the series. That doesn't mean that much. Most entries in a long-running series will have some fans, but this still felt like a good place to dive in. Maybe this was one of those cases where after the first entry in the series, the developers figured out what worked and what didn't and made a better one. We'll save the final judgment there until I go back to the original Dizzy. One aspect of Treasure Island Dizzy is it's the one in the series that's probably the most accessible to people outside of the UK. A version of it was released on the NES in the US. The concept of the game is that Dizzy, an especially acrobatic egg, has washed ashore on a kind of deserted island. There are other people who live here, and you'd think you'd be able to arrange rescue with them. Dizzy has to get a boat, a motor for it, fuel, and enough money to pay the exit fee. The game is a side-view platformer. I can't really call it scrolling since the whole screen changes at once. The world of Treasure Island Dizzy is 63 screens in size, and most of these screens have something going on, whether it's a coin hidden on them, some kind of vital item to collect, or a trap to be avoided. On the Spectrum, you move Dizzy with the Z and X keys, jump by hitting space, and interact with objects by pressing Enter. Enter will pick things up, put things down, read scrolls that you come across, or use the top item in your inventory. The inventory system in Treasure Island Dizzy is one of the more confusing aspects of things. You have 3 inventory slots, and it works as a first-in, first-out pipeline. When you pick up an item, it goes to slot 3. Hitting the Enter key again will drop or use whatever's in slot 1, and move the things in slot 2 and 3 up 1. Coins just get pocketed, normally, but you have to be pretty fast on that Enter key to not have it register twice, so you'll find yourself having to juggle your inventory as you pick up coins. Despite being an egg, Dizzy isn't fragile when it comes to falling. He can fall from any height and walk away unscathed. On the other hand, Dizzy is like an egg, since contact with just about anything will crack him. And there I come to the nastiest aspect of Treasure Island Dizzy. You only have one life. Despite this being an adventure game, and one that will take you about 15 to 20 minutes to complete if you know what you're doing, once you get a game over, it's back to the beginning. If you're playing Treasure Island Dizzy without a guide, it means that the important strategy is to not collect the coins. The coins will always be there and they're free to pick up. You really need to figure out how to get a little bit deeper in the game without wasting 5 or 10 minutes collecting things. And part of that is Dizzy doesn't play fair. You can be walking along on a platform, and then a cage drops out of the sky onto your head, and it's back to the beginning. Your takeaway lesson here is supposed to be that you can jump up to check the screens above you before you advance, but that's still pretty unfair. And of course, wildlife will kill you on contact, and because it always remains in the same position after you exit a screen, you could find yourself crossing a screen boundary right into their maw. For a while I didn't know why I was dying here. Turns out those torches are not part of the background. They kill you when you jump past them. And since you don't die until you hit the ground, it's a little bit tough to make the association. On top of all of that, hitboxes for enemies is a bit ambiguous. The rectangle that's used to check for collisions for both Dizzy and the enemies is a little bit larger than it looks. So you could just drop dead after what looks to be a perfectly good jump. All of this makes Treasure Island Dizzy just completely brutal to play. I think in modern parlance people might say that Treasure Island Dizzy is the Dark Souls of the ZX Spectrum. Except that would be stupid, so I hope nobody would say that. Well, let's move past that. How is Treasure Island Dizzy as an adventure game? And here it's more mixed. Most of the puzzles consist of finding the right object, taking it to the right spot, and then using it there. And for a game of this scale and vintage, that's not really a bad thing. You spend a little bit of time figuring out how to get to a place, work it out, and then get rewarded with another item that's essentially a key to the next location. It's perfectly fine for 1985 when people were still figuring out how to make adventure games come together. Treasure Island Dizzy was made in 1989. It's still not really awful, but it was behind the times. The closest thing Treasure Island Dizzy gets to an interactive puzzle is when you bump into this rock, a new platform appears elsewhere. There's no real connection between that platform appearing and this rock moving, and you actually have to make an effort to avoid kicking the rock. It only becomes a puzzle in the sense that you won't easily make a connection between the two actions. The other significant puzzle in the game is that you have to locate a snorkel that will let Dizzy move underwater. Without it, he dies when he enters the sea, and the ocean divides the map roughly in half. And due to the way that the rotating inventory works, you have to go through a lot of steps to make sure that you will always keep the snorkel in your inventory, because if you drop it while you're underwater, then you die instantly. What you have to do is obvious, so this isn't a puzzle so much as extreme inventory management busy work. Another issue with the puzzles here are that this is a game with more red herring objects than I think any adventure game that I've ever encountered. I'm going to say roughly 3/4 of the objects that you can pick up in this game are totally useless. You'll be walking around and thinking, okay, what do I do with this? And generally the answer is absolutely nothing. For example, one of the very first items that you find is a tube of toothpaste. So once you know that the tube of toothpaste exists, you'll always be on the lookout for someone whose teeth need brightening, maybe an object that could be polished by it, perhaps some kind of toothbrush that you could pair it with. But no, there's absolutely no use for this item at all. Which, if you're not playing with a guide, once again, it means you do not want to interact with anything. Once you've found a spot where you think you can use that item, then you can double back and try it, but thanks to the limited inventory slots and the fact that you'll be replaying huge chunks of the game over and over again, you will very quickly want to stop engaging with the items that the game presents to you. And then I have to talk about the coins. The coins are bad. About 1/3 of them are sitting out in the open. You just walk over, pick them up, and you're done. And about 1/3 of them are hiding behind objects that you'll see and go, yeah, I should pick that up. So you do that, find a coin, and remember where it is for later. And then the last third are also behind objects, but those objects are random bits of scenery. There's a coin behind this tree trunk, for example. And there's one behind this window. There are 2 options for finding these. First, you could mash enter on literally every single possible pixel on the screen. Or second, you could just use a guide. Obviously, I chose option 2 for getting most of my footage, but I did seriously play the game for over an hour before I resorted to that. This was bad design even back in the 80s. You can hide bonuses like this, but they have to be bonuses, extra things, or they have to have some kind of clue pointing the player there. This is just arbitrary. And just to remind you, you have to collect all 30 of these coins in order to complete the game. I didn't go into this video saying, time to take those ZX Spectrum fans down a peg. I was genuinely trying to find something that would let the system, and UK games in general, put their best foot forward. I was thinking, oh, there might be some clunky stuff here, but I bet I'll still find plenty of positive things. And there actually were a few. Honestly, the platforming in Treasure Island Dizzy is pretty good. I like the visual design in the game. Everything is nicely drawn, and you can easily see how you'll interact with things. It's just that the adventure part of this adventure game is awful. And not awful in the sense of, it's been 30 years and things are better now. This was bad design when Treasure Island Dizzy was made. The only way it would have been acceptable is if you were living in isolation, kept away from good game design principles. Now, I don't do this because I don't like to try to drum up engagement, but I'm honestly a bit bewildered. So if you know a game for the ZX Spectrum or any other popular 8-bit micro, or hey, let's even go with the Amiga or Atari ST, and it was developed in Europe, and you think it's something that's both good and deserves wider recognition, then please post a comment. Tell me that there's something better out there than this, because I was genuinely trying to find something good. My plan for this video was that I'd come out of it and go, maybe I've been wrong about all of these European games. Treasure Island Dizzy is not helping here. So please, tell me what I should be looking at. Show me what's great and entertaining in these micro games. I want to find it. And I'm not really having any luck on my own.